Welcome everyone to Augmenting Memory, Justice and Monuments in New Media, a virtual panel that addresses pressing questions around the role of new media in monument making and memory work in public space. My name is Trisha Kim. I am the Associate Director of Public Engagement and Editor at Monument Lab, and I'll also be moderating this exciting conversation. Augmenting Memory is the first of several public programs produced by Monument Lab in celebration and honor of our first app called Overtime, which Paul Farber will introduce and explain in more detail in just a bit. This program features 3 expert panelists, Glenn Contov, Cheyenne Concepcion, and Marisa Williamson, who will share their own projects and experiences of activating public spaces and building coalitions through new media technologies. As a group, we'll discuss how digital tools can serve broader publics, create new kinds of memorials, and resist or challenge our inherited landscapes. We'll think about access, inclusion, and process while addressing the ways that art and technology can be used in service of justice and liberation. And we hope that you at home will also participate in the conversations at hand, whether it's through the chat box or by asking questions in the Q&A box. I'll introduce our panelists in more detail, and in fact, they will also introduce themselves in just a bit. But first, a few words of thanks to our generous supporters without whom this event would not be possible. We'd like to thank the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as the Weitzman School of Design and the Center for Public Art and Space, Penn Praxis, and the SACS program. And last but not least, to our amazing Monument Lab team, in particular, Pete Angevine and Unique Trapman O'Brien. Monument Lab works with a number of different collaborators on a variety of different projects and publications. So I hope that if you don't already, you follow us on social media at monument_lab and keep up with us there. Now I'm going to turn it over to Monument Lab's director and co-founder, Paul Farber, who will share a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much, Trisha, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this event. This is it's a huge treat to be around artists and friends who we hold in such high esteem. And of course, we're here thanks to the vision and the curatorial know-how of Patricia Kim. So thank you for bringing this event together. You know, we are about to launch our latest augmented reality app, Overtime, which is a collaboration with many people, but especially led by renowned poet and artivist Ursula Rucker. And before kind of giving you a bit of a preview of this, I want to just acknowledge the panel as part of a conversation that we have been in officially and unofficially for many years. In fact, it was the first project that we ever worked on in augmented reality by Marisa Williamson, who you'll hear from tonight, Sweet Chariot, The Long Journey to Freedom Through Time, as a part of the Monument Lab 2017 exhibition with Mural Arts. That really changed things for us, and I think a number of other people in the field. Marisa, who will talk more about this, I'm sure, really introduced us to augmented reality. When we first heard it, we thought, wait, are we talking about virtual reality, where you put on a headset or, kind of transport yourself away? But instead, augmented reality, working with the landscape that you've inherited and adding to it and bringing things to life. And I think what was in particular so inspiring and forceful about our collaboration with Marisa, she showed us how to deal with the haunts of history, the unreconciled questions, the ways that democracy in Philadelphia is living alongside injustice, repression, and that if we're going to be able to inaugurate or imagine a new generation of monuments, we have to reckon with the past. And Marisa essentially used augmented reality in ways that rivaled like a pop-up museum or tour or theater festival, but all packed in within an app. And while those were all prototype monuments in that project, it was Marisa's tour that still lives on today because you can still access it. And of course, our conversations over the years with the other collaborators, I think, Glenn, you were one of the first people to publish on our web bulletin, our web journal about your work. And we've just been seeing it from afar and just learning and being grateful for it. And of course, Cheyenne, as a Monument Lab fellow and collaborator, seeing the work that you're doing with New Monuments Task Force has been profound. All of this is part of this moment now where artists and activists and educators are figuring out how to best not just deal with the monuments that we have inherited, but also working to build the next generation of monuments. There is no single fix. There is a profound shift that we're trying to be a part of, away from the idea of permanent, untouchable art that looms above us, but instead to go with the thought that monuments are made to change. And rather than looking for permanence, no monument is permanent in of itself. They require maintenance money and mindsets to keep them up. We want to think about what it takes to really respond to the official and the unofficial, the marked and the undertold stories that really make a place. Which brings us to overtime. And if you can go to the next slide, I want to talk about this, that the ultimate pedestal in Philadelphia is our art museum steps. This is a place that dates back to before it was an art museum, was landscape in Lenape lands here in Philadelphia. The first colonial map of Philadelphia included the area that would include the art museum, listed as Fairmount, a hill right outside of the colonial city's city limits. And over the years, this has shifted from being a place of reservoir. It is a place that we know of now as the Art Museum Steps, that in retrospect, credit to the first Black graduate of University of Pennsylvania's architecture school, Julian Abel, was instrumental in designing. And more recently, this is a place that, of course, if you go almost any day, you'll see people doing the pilgrimage, running up the Rocky Steps, but based on a practice by real boxing heavyweight Joe Frazier, whose actual training practice of running through Fairmount Park and up the Art Museum steps in the 1960s was part of and became incorporated into the Rocky lore. And of course, over the last year, and especially in the re-eruption of civil unrest in defense for the movement for Black lives and contesting systemic racism, the Art Museum Steps has been a launching point for countless protests, vigils, and gatherings. And that all inspired the Monument Lab team, the team at Weitzman School, to produce Overtime. And thanks to support from the Knight Foundation, who've been supporting our art and technology initiatives. If you go to the next slide, we wanted to think about an app that would, rather than trying to build a new monument, here we wanted to work with this space over time, look at what's been there over time, really try to figure out this union of the past, present, and future, and then who better to guide us through that than a poet? And it was Ursula Rucker, who we have worked with over the last few years, who is really a voice of the city that we wanted to collaborate with. And over the last year, we've worked with Ursula and an amazing team behind the app, Dream Syndicate, folks at the Weitzman School, Penn Praxis, the SACS program. And I want to give a shout out also to the Monument Lab team who worked on this. Pete Angevine and Unique Trapman O'Brien, who've been working on production tirelessly and fantastically. Researchers like Lori Allen, Kenyon Sola Anafawishe, Veronica Brown, Ali Nkawaka, and of course, other members of the Monument Lab team like Sarah Spencer and Naima Murphy, and of course, Trisha Kim working on the launch. And a shout out to Lee Sumter as well, who's writing an essay about this. If you go forward, we wanted to come up with a kind of way to engage a space that we might replicate in other places as well. And so there's 3 questions at the heart of this app. What has happened here? What can you see from here? And gathering around the Rocky statue, the most famous Philadelphian who never lived, but there's a long line of, leading up to his statue. We wanted to know what that statue means to you. So this app comes out next week. It's the product of a year's worth of work. Our first meeting was in person, which gives you a sense of our own overtime. But all of the other work has largely been remote, or sometimes when we gather in person. This is an app that you use on your own phone. It will be free. You can do it on your own time and your own space, but we wanted to do it here at the People's Place, the ultimate pedestal in the city. In celebration of this, we thought, why not? We're all family here. Thank you for being here. We're going to give you actually the first ever demos, sneak peeks of the app. No one has seen this, not even every member of our team, and this is what will be available. So we have two short videos for you. If you just imagine that you've downloaded this free app, you've gone to the art museum steps. If you aren't in Philadelphia, or you have other concerns about being in public space or other access questions, you can do this anywhere. You don't have to be in Philadelphia. It's set for the backdrop of the Parkway and the art museum steps. Trisha, would you be so kind to go to the next slide? Let's take a look at, we have 2 short videos for you.
Welcome to the city's front steps, our stoop, if you will. So much has happened right here. Lenape Lands, Fairmount, the Art Museum, ongoing spaces of art and resistance, and so much more. Welcome to the city's front steps.
We'll go to the next slide. One more sneak peek here.
Yo, the most famous Philadelphian who never lived. Well, his legend lives. Over the years, the statue went from film prop to public monument. People line up every day, all year, to take a photo with who some consider to be the patron saint of the underdog. Our art team at Monument Lab dug into this myth and meaning to offer a new art history of Rocky. It includes other real-life figures and statues in this city, monuments from around the world, and artworks right up in the museum. So after you scope out the new art history, we have one more question for you. What does this statue mean to you?
So that's a sneak peek behind the app. And one thing I just want to shout out is that while the app will come out next week, as you can see, at every step, there's a plus sign, because this is also a gathering tool for stories, for information. The app will not be done in many ways until we hear from other people adding their own stories of what's happened here, what the statue means to them. There's more to it, so we invite you to join us when it launches next week. And just a final note of appreciation to our lead artist, Ursula Rucker, who really brought to this app this spirit, this voice, this soul of the city. She's an oracle for us, but she also stands in for all of those people, adding layers, adding stories, sometimes in resistance, sometimes in hope, but nonetheless, creating space and creating moments for us to build and imagine ahead. So thank you to everybody behind Overtime, and thank you to this amazing panel who will share more on their projects. Can't wait to watch. Back to you, Trisha.
Thank you so much, Paul, for introducing overtime and for sharing sort of the fruits of that labor. I'm really excited to now bring all four of our panelists, or not four, excuse me, three of our panelists to the table. And as I promised, I would speak a little bit more about them and what they do. And they will also share their work in more detail. So our panelists include Glenn Kantov, who's the founder and CEO of Movers and Shakers NYC, a nonprofit organization that uses augmented reality to write Black and Brown histories into American school curricula. Cheyenne Concepcion is a multidisciplinary artist and designer based in San Francisco, who also founded New Monuments Task Force in the Bay Area and is also partnering with other designers and artists to consider how augmented reality can be used in the public realm. Finally, Marisa Williamson is a multidisciplinary artist whose work addresses history, race, feminism, and technology. She works and lives in between New Jersey and Connecticut and serves as assistant professor of media arts at the University of Hartford. So now what's going to happen is that our guest panelists will each speak about their work for about 4, maybe 5 minutes each. And I will be controlling the slides from the green room. If you could just let me know when to move forward, that would be great. So our first panelist is Glenn Kantov, followed by Cheyenne Concepcion, and then Marisa Williamson.
All right, well, thank you all so much for having me. It is such an honor to hold space with each and every one of you. So just a brief overview of our work. As mentioned before, I'm the founder of Movers and Shakers, and our mission is to use augmented reality to write Black and Brown history into American curricula. And so the way that we started out was advocating for problematic monuments in New York City to be removed and for undertold stories to rise, with a particular focus on the statue of Christopher Columbus in Manhattan's Columbus Circle. And so we started hosting teach-ins in public spaces to tell the truth. And we saw a value in augmented reality to distill information that is usually caught up in thick textbooks that most people don't read into something that's more easily digestible that a lot of people would want to see and engage with. And so we held teach-ins and demonstrations throughout New York City. We had a slave auction performance piece, for example, to tie Columbus to the genesis of the transatlantic slave trade. I ran the New York City Marathon in chains to apply pressure. But in the end, New York City decided to remove one statue. Meanwhile, there are 155 statues of men. There are 9 of women. There's 23 of animals in New York alone, which is absurd. And a large issue is, outside of the fact that they don't care, is cost. So they tried to address the discrepancy with women, and it costs $1 million per monument to put up. So it's not going to do much to actually reach gender parity. And so we saw an opportunity with augmented reality to erect monuments that reflected the rich history of Black and Brown culture without permission, really. And so that was where the Monuments Project was born. And so, next slide.
In 2021, it's no secret that our statues, our money, even our textbooks have one thing in common. They're full of white male slaveholders. Movers and Shakers is launching Kinfolk, a free app featuring augmented reality monuments of Black and Brown figures we should have learned about in school. We partnered with Netflix to include 4 figures featured in The Men That Fight for America, a docu-series that explores the legacy of the 14th Amendment. Now, the whole family can come together and bring monuments into your living room. You can make them life-size, read their bios, and discover hidden gems through our Kinfolk web archive. Download today in your app store.
Go to the next slide. So yeah, long term we see similar value to Monument Lab as far as using our AR monuments as a gathering space for storytelling and underrepresented stories. Here we have Toussaint Louverture superimposed in where Christopher Columbus was. And so in a shorter term, we decided that we're going to attach culturally responsive pedagogy to our monuments and really use the Kinfolk app as an entry point to a retelling of history as a whole. So if you go to kinfolkhistory.com, which I'll share later, that's really where we have our ecosystem of primary source, secondary source documents. Eventually there'll be 3D art, 3D art and traditional art, video, text, and all that will have curriculum built upon it. We're going to aim it to schools specifically. But the goal is really like a woke version of Pokemon Go. We call it Wokemon Go. And so that is pretty much the through line of what we do. Looking forward to speaking to more on it. But thank you so much for having me.
I love the term Wokemon. So, hi everyone. Hi everyone. I'm Cheyenne Concepcion. I don't quite see my face. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Cheyenne Concepcion. I am an artist and designer based in San Francisco. I work across installation, social practice, sculpture, and I'm the artistic director and founder of New Monuments Task Force. New Monuments Task Force is a conceptual art project guised as a fantastical municipal agency that emerged in the summer of 2020 after a very tumultuous summer for monuments in San Francisco. As Paul said, I've been collaborating with Monument Lab for a couple years now and working in this space. And the tumultuous summer of monuments in San Francisco involved topplings around the city, secret removals of statues in the middle of the night by the city, and a huge national political debacle around a Maya Angelou monument. And as a result, the city kind of felt pressure to kind of create a task force of their own and a study which kind of addressed the frustration of the community in San Francisco. And quite simply, my idea was that I was going to co-opt that study and I was going to co-opt the task force. And so with the help of Monument Lab and the Goethe Institute, I did and founded an unofficial municipal agency of artists and friends, of designers, activists, nonprofits, arts workers, and just community members doing the work that I haven't even met before, but kind of just asked them to be part of this coalition. And so we did what we set out to do. We created a study that was designed to be different than the city study. It was designed to be irreverent. It was designed to be punk rock. It was designed to be approachable, and it was designed to be participatory. So we polled and surveyed the residents of San Francisco and beyond about what they want to see in their new monuments, about what's missing, what the relationship to monuments are, what's hurt you in this landscape in the past. And so we got amazing feedback, created a study, and created a number of initiatives. And one of the initiatives that I'm going to talk to you about today is called Marble in Media. So you can go to the next slide. So after kind of co-opting the study and publishing the study, we kind of set out to kind of keep doing the work. And I was starting to work with an organization called 01 who does art and technology here in San Francisco, and an artist called Camilla McGrain. And she's an amazing new media artist. I think she's most famous for having the largest AR mural in the whole world. It's in Vegas. And so I personally also wanted to create space and empower other artists to kind of keep working in this space and on these topics. And so we decided to do a workshop, and we geared the workshop to addressing a very contested site. Like I mentioned, there was a number of monuments toppled in 2020. And so this was the site of all those topplings. And as you can see, there's over a dozen monuments in a small area. It's a historic public space in San Francisco, the SF Music Concourse, and it's nestled between two major cultural institutions and museums. So it's a site with a lot of history, and it's a site that I felt would play well to a new media project. And so I wanted to kind of just show you some of the things we've been working on as part of this workshop that have contributed to this national dialogue that we're all here for today. Next slide, please. And so this is just some process work from two artists participating in the workshop, Caleb Lightfoot and Paula de la Calle. They both decided to do projects on toppled monuments, Francis Scott Key on the left, Padre Junipero Serra on the right. And they using their different backgrounds, Caleb has an archaeology background and Paula is a visual artist. And so using their background to kind of retell a story and recompose history. As you can see, Caleb has started kind of reversing the process of archaeology to kind of build up his idea. And Paula de la Calle has used her visual art to kind of make a monument to the different movements. There's been multiple movements that have tried to bring this monument down, and it finally came down in 2020. And next slide, please. And this is, I'm going to show two projects that are installed that are going to be installed next week. We're doing an unveiling of our project this Friday. This project is by May Ross, an Indigenous artist based here in the Bay Area, based in Oakland. The monument she's reckoning with here is called the Sundial Monument, and the monument kind of honors the navigators of the sea who found California, and using points of their heritage, she overlaid it with imagery of indigenous symbols, indigenous animals, and things that were very much part of the indigenous landscape before California was found, I guess. And so it's educational. Each of the animals and each of the symbols are linked and interactive. So once you click on them, they kind of explode and you can learn about each of the symbols and its connection to her native heritage. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we have Hannah Scott's work, Speculative History, which is you see her process work on the left, and then you see her AR.
Society X's Department of Recontextualization.
Right, so General John J. Pershing is a real celebrated figure in America and for his contributions to various wars throughout time. And Hannah basically tried to kind of unpack the anatomy of this history and this very linear history that we're told about John J. Pershing, and kind of split it up and kind of map it in a different way. So she uses the kind of History Channel aesthetic and has a lot of audio components intertwined into this intervention, where you can tap on something and she got a friend to kind of record a false history with a very History Channel-esque voice. And so it's an interactive piece and one of my favorites of the workshop so far. And that's all I have for today. So thank you for having me.
Hello, I'm so psyched to be here. I'm Marisa Williamson, and I feel like Paul took a lot of what I was going to say about my project, which is great, but I was super thrilled to be a part of Monument Lab in 2017 and to be able to create Sweet Chariot, which for me was an incredibly important departure from the work that I was making, which had involved performing as Sally Hemings. I had been drawn to that character, that historical figure, and had been trying through performance to figure out how to monumentalize her and to bring her story to the forefront of various landscapes and various narratives around exploitation and ways that, Thomas Jefferson had been elevated and people like Sally Hemings had been kind of reduced to the background of the historical landscape. in places like Charlottesville. And it was really thrilling to be invited to do something else and to create a story that brought together, a project that brought together a chorus of voices from the colonial past, and could, by bringing a chorus of voices together, highlight some of the intersections and overlaps of these struggles for freedom in the United States, or the colonial colony. So Sweet Chariot was an attempt to address a burial ground, which is Wekico Playground, which is in Philadelphia. I'd been given that site and was researching how the burial ground of Mother Bethel AME Church had managed to be covered by a playground, which is a kind of common occurrence. The more research I did, the more I realized that this African-American burial grounds being covered up just happens all over the place. And it's been a kind of driving force behind my work for a few years now. And while I had proposed building something on the site, like a swing set that kids could jump off of and land on a map of historic Philadelphia, when I was told I couldn't build anything for my prototype, I kind of returned to the drawing board and thought about how I could instead, combine some sort of gameplay with a kind of honoring and solemn exploration of the past. I'm really interested in the ways that ghosts and people can cohabit, can share the same space, and how that, performance putting together of contemporary performance and historical performances might give us insight into how history is not only understood, but how it's felt. So my app was created with Dream Syndicate, which at the time was Blue Design. And I came up with an idea. I also realized I had to start the project at Washington Square, which I, in my research, found was also a burial ground. And so ultimately I decided to create a story, a journey, a video scavenger hunt that took people from Washington Square all the way to Wekico Playground through a kind of series of stops, and that this would all be guided by a single person, a person I had discovered in my research, Amelia Brown, as a person buried in Wekico Playground in Mother Bethel AME gravesite. So you can go to the next slide. This is a video that'll just introduce the app a little bit. And you can download the app and you can grab a map at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, or you can contact me for a map, but you can go ahead and play that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monument Lab artist Marisa Williamson. I'm here to present my prototype monument, Sweet Chariot. Sweet Chariot is a video scavenger hunt. Use the map and the app to unlock 8 video clues around the city of Philadelphia. Sweet Chariot explores the African American historical struggle for freedom. The tour begins here in Washington Square West, which used to be Congo Square, a burial ground for Africans who had lost their motherland. Find the Washington Square West Monument Lab Research Laboratory. There, you can grab a map and download the app to begin your journey. Using this poster or the back of the map, unlock your first clue. It's a good thing you found me. I'm afraid I'm lost. There are a secret network of doorways you see, and once you go through one and then another, it's hard to find your way back. But I think you can help me. Throughout the city of Philadelphia, there are stories of the past, hidden in plain sight. Use the Sweet Chariot app to unlock 8 videos that tell these stories of the African American struggle for freedom.
So yeah, that just summarized what the app kind of does, but there are 8 videos that tell stories about Octavius Catto, W.B. Du Bois, the Fortons, Sarah Mapps Douglas, and it was an opportunity. Each video was an opportunity to collaborate with someone, a scholar or another performer, a poet. Yolanda Wisher is featured in there. And for me, the project was not only about bringing together a chorus of historical figures, but bringing together a chorus of artists, local, creatives. Gabrielle Patterson, who helped me make an animation for the final scene, as a way of trying to kind of pull together voices of resistance in this very subtle way to figure out how, collage, collaboration, non-sequential, non-linear time could present an alternative to what a static, stone monument can be. And ultimately, this project has kind of led me to think even more ambitiously about how you can tell historical stories. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm currently working on creating a kind of version of Sweet Chariot for Charlottesville, a place where I'm very, very interested in kind of surfacing these difficult histories and figuring out how to tell them. And this project will be guided by Sally Hemings, the character I had been struggling to negotiate for years. And Sally Hemings, rather than Amelia Brown, will take people through historic Charlottesville. For me, it's an opportunity to think about memorial and monument for Sally Hemings, and to do that through bringing all of the voices, some of the voices of historical enslaved people, free people living in Charlottesville, into the forefront of that landscape as a kind of tribute to all of the enslaved workers, all of the enslaved families who make that city what it is, and continue to fight against the kind of white supremacy that others are claiming is the story of Charlottesville. I think I'll leave it there, but if you go to the next slide, you can just see that project is called, so many things. It'll be, again, collaborative, trying to pull in other artists for that project. And you can hop to the next slide. And it's called Unsettling Grounds. So please check it out. And I do want to just thank Monument Lab for kind of launching this practice. It really has meant a lot, and I feel it's given me a lot of purpose in my practice, and I can't wait to talk with the other artists.
So at this point, I would love to invite Glenn and Cheyenne back onto the screen. And so we can all share space together. It's really great to sort of hear you all talk about your projects together in the same space. And I have questions for each of you. We will also, following this period of time, address any of the audience questions as well. So my first question is for Glenn. First, congrats on the launch of Kinfolk. I cannot wait to download it myself and to check out what's happening on Netflix as well. And as you were describing your project, you were discussing how there's this obvious gap, not only within our public spaces, but also our history books and public education. And you've discussed really eloquently and beautifully how AR is a tool and technology that can help to start bridging those gaps. But I have a question around the work that Movers and Shakers does regarding these gaps in accessibility. For instance, it's not just that our stories are missing, right? But as COVID has really, I think, demonstrated or illustrated in stark terms, access to technology, access to books, access to the tools and resources that one might need in order to sort of do the work of learning history are also kind of big questions, I think, when it comes to broader conversations around technology in educational spaces. And so I was wondering if you might speak a little bit about how your work, but also how Movers and Shakers as an organization is really approaching this question of access and resource from multiple different directions.
Absolutely. Well, first off, our foray into augmented reality came from the perspective of democratizing access to narratives that institutions and the government are refusing to uplift, right? And so it was, quite frankly, we were pretty low budget at the time, and we wanted to make a lot of content really quickly to spread to the people, and anchor our teachings in a meaningful way. And so we felt that AR was a great way to do that, given that most people do have smartphones. But then even in terms of access to smartphones or familiarity with augmented reality, there's another layer to that, right? And so it's for that reason that we were intentional in building out a web platform, so that if maybe you don't have a computer at home, but if you can get to a local library or anywhere where you can get access to the internet, this archive of knowledge is really there for you to absorb in whatever way you see fit. And so one thing that we discovered as we were doing user testing and speaking with different academics is that Like we knew someone who literally like would go to different archives, like drive state to state and announce themselves, hey, I'm XYZ academic, like I'm looking to get information on this person. And they were denied access or they had to pay like a lot of money, right? And so if you're even if you want to like go past the red tape and change curriculum, that is a boundary within itself. And so part of the goal of Kinfolk is really to do the legwork in terms of centralizing that information that's hidden behind paywalls, and putting it all into one place. But then, we're not going to be able to get it all. So the other aspect is, given the fact that our team has capacity to create 3D models and 3D assets, we can use this, we can take this next step and create the artifacts ourselves, with proper academic guidance, obviously, so that everyone can reference it. And then the final part is, um, quite frankly, if our information is homework that kids have to do and it's compulsory, they're going to have access to it because the teacher's going to make them do it. And so that's really our goal, is to get Kinfolk into Title I schools throughout the US so that access isn't an issue.
Thank you so much. We should, I know there's conversations among our lawmakers about like, should internet be, like water or, shelter or heat, like it should be, something that's given to everyone. And I think something that we might want to start demanding in more full force. Thank you. So my next question is for Cheyenne. It's always exciting for me to learn more about what's happening with New Monuments Task Force. And from we talked about it, you shared that the city of San Francisco has now created their own task force, right? Sort of modeling their questions and their concerns after the ones that you posed throughout the summer and the fall. And I'm wondering, now that you're working with 01 and you are teaching this class on media and marble, I'm wondering how you see new media tools specifically in these technologies informing the process of designing public spaces and civic spaces. With your multiple experiences, I'm wondering how you can bridge together, or if you're thinking about bridging together the task force work and then the work that you're doing with regard to AR.
Yeah, so I think there's two real prominent aspects of new media tools and technology that are pertinent to public art design, public space, and my design background at least. And I think it's the inherent like spatiality of new media. The third dimension that you can enter into is like super, super important and something we should tap into. And I think also the agility and speed, like I think Glenn kind of mentioned this, the agility of being able to create these assets quickly. Like there is a speed aspect that cuts through processes, I think. But back to the first aspect of spatiality. I have a design background. I've made public art projects, designs for public art projects, and usually it comes through as a commission or a RFP, and you create these images to kind of sell your idea and connect the story to the city or like the developer or communities. But I think that using new media as a tool, you can even push that further. You can inhabit a space with new media. You can feel the scale of a monument in relationship to your own body, in relationship to the environment, and how it interacts with an environment. And so I think that's very strong in terms of design and in terms of getting people to see the story you're trying to tell, right? And on the second tip on agility and speed, the public art process is so long, and there's permits and there's liability, and there's like, it just takes forever to get a project done. It takes years. And I think that new media tools, you can still get your point across and start activating spaces, which is the most important part of public art, right? Without the liability, without a lot of consequence almost, And so I think that public artists, I think public art offices should start looking to these tools to kind of incorporate it at least into the early stages of their processes, because it's, to me, it's this factor of low consequence but high impact of trying to tell a story is really strong.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This question is for Marisa. So, I mean, I think that we've all sort of seen the controversies in sort of media, right? In the media about how these big tech companies are really, whether they know it or not, are in service of these kind of white supremacist ideas, right? Around gender and race and so on. With kind of the recent controversies at Google, for instance, around ethics and technology. And so I'm wondering, for you, Marisa, in particular, how do you see technology, but new media in particular, sort of shaping or in service of feminist inquiry as it intersects with questions around race and history and memory?
Yeah, I hadn't thought much about, yeah, I think tech is really white. But I have been always drawn to just the fiddly elements of, video and computers. And, I think come from a generation where, first generation, like a computer in the home where you could be kind of having a one-on-one experience with the computer. And so out of that, I realized how quickly you can experiment and cut up found things. And so I think I really came to new media through a love of, like, kind of a quilting, historical quilting practice of being able to cut up what's there and rearrange it to imagine new futures. And so some of my early work was just like cutting up things ripped from a very early YouTube to put women in conversation who had not been in conversation before because they were from different times and, different worlds. And so for me, technology and new media offers a kind of, as Simone Brown would talk about, like a viewing, like a reading strategy for seeing the absences, the things that have been lost and been, the black holes that Black history occupies in many ways. So I really am interested in making things visible through media. And then I'm also interested in how media can allow for a kind of Black feminist theory to be put into practice by bringing people on the margins to the center, especially when that means bringing them also together in a space and having them be in conversation. So I love, new media for the ways that it can like collapse hierarchies and kind of mash things up, the way you can juxtapose, the way you can montage, the way you can produce a defamiliarization, how the new, the familiar can be unfamiliar, other way around, anachronism, glitches, all of those feel really relevant to me in trying to convey how history, feels to me, and how I think people need to, wrap their minds around the ways it's already been manufactured and produced and mediated through a certain white supremacist lens, and how we might go about scraping it or hacking it or turning it in on itself to find out, where we exist in its legacy and its history and its, left behind, the remnant, the edges of it. So yeah, I think I love it as a nerdy kid sitting in their room on the computer, but I also have come to really love it as a kind of powerful tool for changing imagining new things, finding it as it's a way to really imagine a new future.
I love the metaphor of quilting and snipping things or weaving things together. And what you were saying reminds me a lot of, I quote this in every panel, I swear, but Michel Rolfe-Trujillo's Silencing the Past, where he talks about history is really a bundle of silences, right? And kind of the work of addressing that, and if you want to call it decolonizing or what have you, is the work of unsilencing and quilting things together and patching things together. And I think that's a thread that runs through all three of your work. I want to maybe stop talking and give you, all three of you, the opportunity to ask each other questions if you have them. And in the meantime, for our attendees, if you have questions for our panelists, if you could address it in the Q&A box, we'll get to that. We'll try to get to all of them, but I can't make any promises. So if you have any questions,
There's some questions. I'm just reading them in the chat, in the I don't know, Q&A.
Questions.
Or I could just start by reading out this question from Elizabeth Johnson. Should we just do that? Yeah, okay. So Elizabeth Johnson asks, are you concerned about the difference between the imposition of between the imposition that physical monuments make in public space as opposed to the optional and largely invisible nature of AR monuments? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I would say it's really tough. I mean, Sweet Chariot was, I was going to mention rewatching the video. It's most successful when there's a monument lab sitting on the street, pointing people toward the augmented reality and helping them access it. And it is really difficult to compete with like physical monuments when you're playing around in AR. But I think that's kind of my next step, is figuring out how to like create some breadcrumbs to these types of works.
Yeah, so for us, our trajectory is definitely when it's safe to gather people in a public space to do similar things and get a lot of attention around it and get eyeballs towards the narratives. But outside of that, that is why we're making it homework.
That's smart. Yeah, assigned.
Yeah, similar to Marisa, we kind of had to pair our intervention with a map and with signage all around, just to get people, like it was almost an explosion of signage just to get people moving from one spot to the other. And I feel like AR, it's a little clunky having to download and like a little, so there is that setback in that way, I think. But I guess a balanced digital physical.
Yeah, I guess like a question that I've always had with AR in particular is like, what do we lose in the physical and the material and the kind of like in being the presence of something or someone? And I noticed in Marisa's work, performance and bodies that literally like fill up spaces is a huge aspect of that. And so just sort of thinking out loud about what's perhaps lost, or if that is even something we should be overly concerned about. But the next question comes from Alida, I think. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, who asks if you panelists could speak about whether you feel any connection to earlier waves of augmented reality activists. Are there any key figures or pieces of work that you consider to be foundational precursors to your own practice? Asking as a PhD student who's excited to learn more about the past and current work in this space.
I really loved the Philadelphia Zoo used to have a key that you carried around and you could plug it into a box and the box would speak to you, which is like pretty low tech, but there was something about putting something in the hand of a child that they could then use to engage and unlock information in a kind of, museological space that I really loved. I also loved the TV show Ghostwriter, which suggested that there was like a floating ghost little beam of light that would help these kids solve mysteries. And I think those kind of, ideas of, a very helpful, augmented spirit were really informative to me.
So one of the first AR pieces I ever saw was Prosthetic Reality. It's a book. Sutu is the primary artist, and it's like this anthology of different like illustrations. You have the iJack app, and then it's image recognition, and you see these animations come to life. And there's a piece by Ezra Clayton Daniels and Adebukula Bundunrin, where the first thing you see is a slave auction block and slaves on the block, and then as soon as the AR comes to life, it changes to modern day. You're in the court system, and you see Black men in prison suits, and like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Like that was an encyclopedia. Just and actually, thanks to Sutu, I actually had dinner with Ezra and Buki in LA, and they donated the piece for us to use in our teach-ins, and that was foundational as far as just like starting to churn the wheels for what we were doing. And then what you call it? Oh, I forget his name though. I wish I could remember his name, but The inspiration for one of our pieces, Colin Kaepernick, where he's taking a knee and his fro is a fist, comes from a prominent Sudanese activist. I'm gonna find him and I'll throw the name in the chat. But yeah, those are two prior references. But definitely check out Prosthetic Reality, like incredible.
For me, when doing this project, Nancy Baker Cahill's Fourth Wall app was really influential. And what she did in New Orleans was really, really influential to us. And not on the AR tip, but Amy Balkin's Invisible 5 tour really kind of organized my thoughts about how to kind of produce this space in the public realm. It's more of an audio tour, but in terms of conceptual framework, I really kind of drew from that project.
Love Amy Balkin, love Fourth Wall app, which also features Artsakh Monument, as well as In Plain Sight, organized by Rafa Esparza. Those are amazing projects.
Right.
So Michael Dola asks or says, love all these projects. As someone who works in secondary education, I can't wait to see these and other apps get built out more and more. But one worry that I have is related to data security and the privatization of this historical and creative commons that y'all are developing right now. How does the panel think about the AR space with regard to these issues as tech and content continues to develop and mature?
AR space.
I'm into, data security. I think it's interesting to think about what you can do for more like altruistic causes that people have already gotten comfortable yielding over to an app. So something I'm working on with a student is just trying to gather data from people as they play a virtual escape room, and then to kind of use that data to draw a picture of people's experiences of being oppressed or trapped or confined by their environments or their identities. So I'm interested in the ways we can make people more aware of their data security by borrowing it or getting access to it through consent, but using it in ways that draw attention to it and to that data. But yeah, it's a good question.
Wasn't really a concern for us. I felt like it was. I mean, the project was almost to kind of be as public and as unapologetic, right? And so I didn't find it's not a question I came up against during this process.
Probably have the most boring answer of the three. Since we're dealing with schools, they are super strict on data security. They say jump, we say how high.
Speaking of schools, another question from Unique Trapman O'Brien asks, having developed these new processes for new works, what labor and obstacles do you face asserting the place of your work in these existing structures like school curriculums, public art processes? How far do these institutions need to be held responsible for catching up to you?
Dealing with that in real time. Yeah. So there is a school district in the South that was interested in working with us, and the principal spoke to the board, and the response was that our work was too radical. It would offend white conservative parents. They don't want to rock the boat. And as of now, we're just a supplement, but they had this fear that we were going to replace their whiteness. So I think the through line for that was white fragility. But that is a thing that's happening right now. But one way that we're looking to circumvent a lot of that bureaucracy and whiteness is through hitting Ela standards, like English standards. So in public schools, the state says you need to learn about X, Y, and Z. And we're a 7-person startup right now. We don't have the time, capacity, bandwidth, anything like that to really do the legislative legwork that's necessary. One day, look out. But right now, well, an opportunity that we do see and that we've heard from English teachers is that there's so much more flexibility in terms of what you can talk about and who you can talk about as long as you're hitting their standards. So that is a path forward for us.
Yeah, I think it's great to sneak subversive, I don't know if it's subversive, radical narratives in through these like hidden channels. That's what I think it's a good.
The goal. At least for me, I hope they catch up, but I feel like I'm kind of at least the strategy for using and occupying this space in San Francisco was doing it quick, doing it fast, and doing it first. And so I hope they catch up to us, you know, and I hope I hold them responsible through this process. And so I don't know what they're gonna, I mean, I don't know how to answer the question of how to hold them responsible, but just it's kind of the goal to me. So
I think there's also something you can augment space around an institution, and then all of a sudden, you know, it might produce a discourse. As someone mentioned before, that, you know, you don't need permission to like put an augmented reality experience near something or on a sign or on a plaque that already exists. So that can be a way to kind of call people out and hold them accountable.
Yeah, totally.
If I might add as well, I think that like something that the mainstream conversation lacks is like nuance in terms of unpacking the interconnectedness of what activism truly means. So like, although there are certain artists that might not pick up a sign and start screaming in front of police or blocking highways, like their work is revolutionary in itself, right? And I say this because you look at what happened over this past summer, and a lot of eyes were opened in terms of like the output of a systemic and intentional process of dehumanization that has existed since like before Columbus's boats like landed on these shores, right? Like the importance of inserting narratives that have been historically excluded literally relates to a lot of the problems that we're seeing on the activist front, right? And so in terms of holding schools responsible, it's like on our end, there's like the content and in terms of what we're delivering, but then like what's happening on the streets is then going to permeate to the mindsets, and then that pressure is going to be seen in the school board meetings. And so it's all a process, and I really think we should be all talking to each other more to accelerate that process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna, in looking at the time, I'm gonna combine two questions from Michael and Ela, I think. So these two questions have to do with durability and temporality, or ephemerality, really. So new media obviously creates new categories while collapsing hierarchies, making things visible. But there's a question around the endurance of these projects and their archivability. The benefits being it cuts through processes, you know, red tapes, bureaucracy, but also that means that they're not, you know, physical bronze sculpture, things that our historians can, you know, archive it and create categories for. So durability and maintenance issues are there. And if you don't have ongoing budgets, the upkeep of, you know, archiving and maintaining your AR apps and the data around it can be quite daunting. What are some ideas or concerns that you have around these tools or software as they become obsolete? Or do you feel that that ephemerality is okay, that temporality and that transience is okay?
I feel like it's a starting point. I feel that temporality and ephemerality is a starting point. It's okay, and an intervention can be geolocated in the space for until the end of time. We can build around it. We can build in front of it, and I feel like it's almost in the public art process. From my perspective, it's one of the first steps you take, but I wouldn't say it's the step that lasts through time.
So I think that like the practice of knowledge preservation has been something that we just do as humans, right? Like we went from libraries to the internet in a decade. And so, I mean, ideally for us, like we have this web platform that's going to be a living, breathing archive. Hopefully funders continue to believe in that. But like, um, even though we have a new way of approaching things, you look at, you know, large historical societies, museums, cultural institutions that have like institutional support, and even crowdfunded support in some ways. Like, as long as people believe in our way of um, retelling history and archiving it, it's going to continue to be supported. And if there's a better way, then so be it. However, I do agree with the point of like, especially with like AR being a very emerging space, right? Like, we're not married to it. It's not the be all end all. We can like, okay, it's like, here, you see it now that we have your attention, you should know about these 50 things about Tucson Louverture that your teacher didn't tell you, right? Like, that's what it's really all about. And technology is evolving exponentially. We aspire to stay at the cutting edge and apply those new methods to the practice of knowledge conservation, knowledge production, and retelling of narratives.
Yeah.
I've
been thinking a lot about the afterlife of work and the afterlife of people, and about the possibility that you know, the creation of something that may not be visible or accessible like immediately to everyone does not mean that it's not world making in a kind of, you know, plane that I'm not yet aware of. So, you know, I've been interested in the ways that our ancestors were making things daily that didn't necessarily have, you know, a concrete, you know, immediately material, you know, evidence that they would be world making, but that they were. And so I've tried to kind of slow down and think about a kind of deep time relationship to these projects that maybe someone will discover the AR later when, you know, something points them back to it and it becomes one of these buried monuments or rediscovered monuments just when it's kind of needed again the most. So maybe that's being a little magical of me, but the more you do the research, the more you realize like this technology, even as it gets, you know, broken or hard to access, is not unlike a lot of technologies people have relied on in the past to try to get their story into the future.
I mean, what you all are saying is, or teaching me, is that new media as a form is great and all. It's great. And what really needs to happen, I think, Glenn, you said it, democratizing not only access, but also the processes of knowledge creation, whether that is making monuments or writing history books. And it just seems like really there should just, our institutions need to make a commitment to preserving these stories, whether it's through new media or not. One last question, and then I will, oh my gosh, there are a lot, but okay. Since we're, oh my goodness, there's so many, and now I don't know who to choose from. Okay, why don't we ask Kathy's question, or part of Kathy's question? Okay,
a good one.
I have to ask this question. I'm sorry, y'all. How would you consider a physical monument to COVID? Is the day of the permanent monument now over?
I would say no to the day of the permanent monument being now over. I want to open it up for the monument I don't want to take all the I think a monument to COVID could be enhanced by new media technology, and we're still going through it, and I can almost imagine it being kind of like an in real time thing. Unfortunately, that's the matter of the situation and something new media technology could do, but that's just me coming up with an idea on the fly. And so
No, I think I've been thinking a lot about the combination of AR and actual, and building something, but then having AR be something that constantly updates the monument, or puts on a stage a different content at various intervals. So I think yeah, the COVID thing, I mean, it's too soon in my mind to figure out what these things should look like, but and it's still happening. Yeah, it's just unfolding.
I mean, I think that, like, given the complexity of COVID, and like how it affects all of us so differently, or like pockets of people especially so differently, I think like there's tremendous potential for engaging new media in a way that like um that a physical monument could not. So it's like obviously there's going to be like parades and memorials to like the frontline workers, especially the medical staff, right? And then like on the other hand, there's like the what you call it, on the other hand, there's like the mental health crisis that's happening in this country. There's the fact that COVID was a catalyst for like a new civil rights movement. There are excluded workers who literally haven't gotten paid because of their immigration status, that they were recently incarcerated. So like, I'm just thinking like some sort of like data visualization that shows the interconnectedness of it all would be really interesting. And like the beauty of new media and the importance of this is that like I'm positive that like there in the upcoming decades we're going to find so many cases of negligence that would dwarf like Cuomo's negligence with the nursing homes, for example. And those cases should be memorialized and told as a lesson for others for the next pandemic. So yeah, I think new media is the way to do it because of its potential to consistently be updated as we find new things.
That note, it is 6:14 p.m. If I'm anything, I tried to be as punctual as possible, and respect our panelists' time. But thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to Glenn, Cheyenne, and Marisa for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, and expertise with us. I've learned so much, and that went by really quickly, and I feel like we could talk much longer about this. But of course, things have to end. So everyone, please check out our panelists' work in more detail online. You can follow them on social media. And again, thank you so much to the Knight Foundation, to the Center for Public Art and Space, Penn Praxis, the SACS program, our Monument Lab team. And don't forget to download the Overtime app in addition to Kinfolk next week. Well, Kinfolk, I think you can download today if you wanted, but Overtime next week when it launches. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and participating in this conversation with us.